If you're thinking about buying your first home, stop. You're right where you need to be, and I need you to listen up because this part can sneak up on people. Let's say you've got your down payment ready, you know exactly what neighborhood you want to live in, and you're ready to start looking for your home. And I'm hoping this is reaching you before you're putting in an offer because you might catch wind of this thing called closing costs. And if you haven't heard of closing costs, then this is even just as important for you because it's a part of every transaction, whether you're financing your purchase or paying in cash. So what are closing costs? How much are they? Who's paying them? What are you talking about? I'm breaking it all down in this video so that you can feel far more prepared when you start your home search and you go in to make your first offer. What are closing costs? Closing costs are the fees and expenses that you pay to finalize your transaction. These are things like lender fees, title insurance, taxes, and recording costs. They usually add up to about 2 to 5% of the purchase price if you were to look on Google, but typically we like to lean more towards 3% of that total purchase price. If you are financing your purchase, if you're paying in cash, closing costs are going to be less for you. You're not using a lender, you don't have things like an appraisal required from the lender, so you're looking at a lower cost. This can typically be in the ballpark of about 1%. Obviously, both numbers I just gave you vary from a transaction to transaction basis. These are all just generally speaking. So for the sake of this video, we'll use a purchase price of $300,000 when referencing these percentages so you can kind of like wrap your head around what that actually looks like in a dollar amount. So say you're buying a $300,000 home, 3% of that in closing costs would be about $10,000. Same purchase price in cash, 1%, looking at like more like $3,000, which is a pretty big discrepancy in price. And before we dig too deep into this video, I would just like to say I am not a title company. I am not a lender. This is not my area of expertise. This is not lending advice. I am simply just trying to generalize these costs and help you as a first-time home buyer get a better idea of what to anticipate. I think being able to anticipate these costs and like having a good understanding of that not only helps you feel more confident in the purchase of a home and understanding all the metrics that go into it, but it can also prevent you from losing it a little bit when you first get a whiff of closing costs. And again, all these numbers vary from transaction to transaction, and there are different ways to minimize your closing costs, but this should at least help give you a better idea of what to expect. So, like I mentioned, when you're financing your purchase, closing costs are going to be higher because you're going to be working with a lender and you'll need an appraisal. There are other fees involved. When you're paying in cash, you don't have a lender, no one's lending you the money, you don't need an appraisal, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But there are costs that are consistent in both cash and finance transactions. Unless otherwise negotiated in your offer, as the buyer, you will be on the hook for these things. So regardless of whether you are financing your purchase or you're paying in cash, you will still be responsible for a handful of things. First one being title search and title insurance. So a title search is when your title company reviews public records to confirm that the seller does in fact legally own that property and that there are no liens, unpaid taxes, or pending ownership disputes that come with that property. The title insurance then protects you as a buyer and sometimes the lender in the event that any future claims or hidden items that didn't show up in the title search later show up. Without this title insurance, if something were to come up, no one's got your back, and you now as the buyer and the new owner of this home, that's on you to figure out. So the fee for this title search can generally cost between, let's say, $60 and $120. Again, this is dependent on a transaction by transaction basis. And then title insurance, Google will tell you it's anywhere between $1.75 to $4 per every $1,000 of purchase price. So to make that more digestible, again, on a $300,000 home with those percentages, it could be anywhere between $500 to $1,200 on the high end. Another fee you can expect in your closing costs costs would be recording and deed filing fees. And what this means is just officially recording the transfer of ownership with the county. And the The standard fee in Minnesota, at least for deed recording, is right around $50, $46 to be specific. But again, I think that number can change. Another cost you can anticipate is a transfer tax fee. Now, this is often paid by the seller, but not always. It can be negotiated different depending on the purchase agreement. In Minnesota, for transfer taxes, the deed tax rate is 0.33% of the purchase price of the home. So if you're buying a $300,000 home, 0.33% of that, you can expect to see a charge of around $990 for that. You can also expect to pay for prorated property taxes. Now, what this means is that leading up to closing day, it is the seller's responsibility to pay for those taxes on the home. From closing day to the end of the year, that then falls on you as the buyer and the new owner of the home to pay for those. Something that may be required specifically more for finance purchases would be getting the property surveyed. So if you are required from either your title company or your lender to get that survey done in order to verify the property boundaries, you can expect to pay somewhere in the ballpark of $500 for that. There's a chance you may see some attorney fees, some closing agent fees, or fees needed for escrow. This could all be in regard to document preparation, settlement, or paying the closing coordination. And then the last one, I don't typically think of this as like a closing cost because it is done well before closing and it is due upon completion, but that would be a home inspection. Now, as far as inspection costs, you can expect to pay anywhere between $350 and $500 for a general inspection. But to my knowledge, most inspection companies offer add-ons, if you will, things like a sewer scope or a radon test. And I think those prices vary between inspector to inspector, but in my experience at least, people who opt for the general inspection, the sewer scope, and the radon test, it can come out to around $900 to $1,000 for the whole thing. But in my opinion, I'll always say this, I think that is money incredibly well spent. Those inspectors obviously do that for a living. They are so good at finding things and testing things and looking for things that most people wouldn't even think of when looking at the home. And especially the sewer scope, you can't see underground. You have no idea what's going on. So to the $250 to pay to get your sewer scoped, in the event that they find something, I don't think you're going to find a situation where you get your sewer line dug up and replaced or worked on for anything less than like $10,000. So to pay $250 up front to potentially save you thousands and thousands of dollars, I mean, again, money well spent. And even if you don't discover anything, which is best case scenario, at least you have that peace of mind. And now it's not maybe this like impending doom that you're like always thinking about, like, oh, what if my sewer line just like busts in the ground? But I digress. Get a home inspection. That's all I'm saying. And so these are the things that I would consider baseline costs. They are common in both cash and financed transactions, and you can expect to see most, if not all, of these fees come up as under your closing costs as a buyer. And going back to what I said at the top of the video, cash transactions, you can expect 1% of the purchase price for closing costs. Finance transactions, you can expect somewhere closer to 3%. That's because when you use mortgage financing, you can expect additional costs imposed by the lender or things that are required just through the mortgage process itself. A lot of the things we're about to dig into are most commonly not involved with a cash transaction, or if they are, they can be greatly reduced. And a lot of that, again, is just because there is no lender. You have the cash, no one's lending you the money. You don't have to pay somebody to figure out that end of the transaction. And again, I'm not a lender. I'm not a title company. This is not lending advice. I am a realtor here in Minneapolis, Minnesota on the To the Twin Cities team. But if you'd like somebody to sit down with you and maybe help you break down these numbers a little better or break them down to more specific to your situation, feel free to reach out to me. You can send me an email at paul@tothetwincities.com. Send me a text. You can call me. You can reach out on Instagram, whatever medium. I promise you will get a hold of me, and I'd be more than happy to sit down and answer any questions you might have. So back to this list. These are things that you will most likely only see if you are financing your purchase. The first one being the loan origination and underwriting fees. Simply put, this is to process your loan application. A typical range, at least for here in Minnesota, you could expect 0.5 to 1% of the loan amount. So on a $300,000 home, 0.5% to 1%, anywhere between $1,500 to $3,000. You can expect to pay an appraisal fee as well. Now, appraisals are required with every finance transaction, and that's because the appraisal, third-party person, comes out and determines the value of the home, and lenders require this appraisal to confirm that value and make sure that it is in line with the purchase price. To help you maybe understand this more, let's say you are purchasing a home for $350,000 financed. The appraiser comes out and says this home is only worth $325,000. Okay, so now we're looking at a gap from $325,000 to $350,000. What does that mean? Well, basically, that appraisal is saying we only think this house is worth $325,000, and the lender is going to say, okay, well, we're only going to give you $325,000 because that's what the home is worth. So you, as the buyer, you're now on the hook for this $350,000 purchase. So you'll get up to $325,000 financed, but now there's $25,000 that falls on somebody to pay, and that defaults on the buyer to cover that appraisal gap. Now, that can always be negotiated. Will the seller pay? It's hard to say, but just know that that is a thing. Appraisal gaps are a thing, and it can be a little freaky, which is why you work with a realtor so someone can help walk you through that stuff, help you potentially avoid a $25,000 appraisal gap, because I don't care who you are, $25,000 ain't nothing. That's a very significant amount of money, especially if you're not anticipating it and you're already on the hook to literally buy this $325,000 home. So how much can you expect to pay for an appraisal? Typically, an appraisal can be anywhere between like $300 to $500 plus ish dollars. Another closing cost you can expect is a credit report or a credit check fee. This is, when people reference the lender pulling your credit, that's what this is. And it's just the lender assessing your credit worthiness. According to Google, it can be anywhere from the the number tens, to the low hundreds of dollars. So somewhere in that range that will get added on as a closing cost. Next, we have mortgage or the lender's title insurance. I kind of touched on this earlier, but what this does is protects the lender's interest in the title. Again, if something comes up, protects them from an absolutely detrimental situation, I'm sure. And this cost, hard to put this into a dollar amount, it really varies dependent on the loan amount itself. For just an easy ballpark, maybe on a $300,000 home, you can expect anywhere between $500 to $1,000 for that lender title insurance policy. This next one I consider to be more of like an elective cost, and it would be points or discount points towards your mortgage. I will explain this more because I think a lot of people don't actually know what these are, but basically 1 point equals 1% of the loan amount. So you can choose to pay points at closing, and what these do is lower your interest rate. Again, 1 point equals 1% of the loan amount. So on a $300,000 home, each of these points will be $3,000. And typically 1 point will lower your interest rate about 0.25%. But again, that exact number will vary dependent on the lender, the loan type, and the market conditions. But I think it's definitely nice to know if you're in a position to pay towards those points, then I think you definitely should if you can, because it can be a really smart thing to do. Obviously, lowering your interest rate, who doesn't want that? It's cheaper money at the end of the day. Okay, moving on to mortgage insurance or private mortgage insurance. You might see it as PMI. It's kind of the typical way to reference that. So PMI is something that's charged by the lenders, and basically what it does is it's a fee that protects the lender, not the buyer, in the case that you, the buyer, stop paying your mortgage. It's usually required if you put less than 20% down on a conventional loan, but it can be removed once you've built up enough equity. So this is basically when your loan to value drops below 80% of your home's value. I do have a video on this channel that is the difference between conventional and FHA loans, and I kind of dig into this a little bit more. But to help you understand, let's say $300,000 home, you put down 10%, that's $30,000. Your loan is then going to be made out for $270,000, and that puts your LTV, loan to value, at 90%, which in turn would require private mortgage insurance, PMI. If you put down 20%, or $60,000, or you get your loan to a point where the balance is $240,000, your loan to value then becomes 80%, which at that point, the 80%, you are no longer required to be carrying private mortgage insurance. The cost of PMI can vary, but typically it's 0.3 to 1.5% of the loan amount per year, and that's just added to your monthly mortgage payment. You might not even notice that it's there until it's gone, because at the closing table, they tell you this is your payment right now, and you just kind of accept it. You're like, okay, yeah, that's about what we thought. And it's not until, again, you get that loan to value ratio to 80% to where that will come off. Then you can expect to pay some lender's costs in regard to processing and admin fees. This can vary between lender, and it can either be a percentage or a flat dollar amount. Another closing cost that could show up would be prepaid interest, or maybe you're putting money towards escrow reserves. So when I say prepaid interest, I basically mean the interest that's prorated from your closing date to when your first mortgage payment is due. And then escrow reserves will be money held by the lender, which could be for taxes or insurance, things like that. And something else that could show up on your closing costs would be a flood certification and survey, depending on where the lot is, where the home is. This is relatively small, but it can be an important item that can add to those closing costs. So a flood certification, this will verify whether the property is in a FEMA designated flood zone, and it's pretty inexpensive, usually between like $15 to $25, and it is a standard requirement from lenders for financed homes. And so as you can see, because of all these other things we just went through, that's why a finance purchase, your closing costs will be most likely more than those on a cash purchase. So hopefully now when you hear the term closing costs, you'll have a way better understanding of what that actually means, what actually makes up those closing costs, and hopefully you can anticipate better what you'll need to bring to the closing table with this information. Now I will say, maybe this is another video, but now there are ways to manage your closing costs. And now just because all these closing costs do exist, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're on the hook for these every single time, no matter what. Something I think about almost daily in this job, something I heard in my real estate classes, one of my teachers said, if there's one thing I hope you remember from this class, it's that everything in real estate is negotiable. And gosh dang, that man was right. Closing costs are no different. Something that maybe the most, hard to say, very common to negotiate some type of closing cost concessions in the offer. As a buyer, you can honestly request whatever you want from the seller. You can say, hey, seller to pay 3% in closing costs, seller to contribute 1.5%. You can write in a dollar amount. Obviously, a stronger offer would be not asking for any closing cost concessions from the seller, because that money has to come from somewhere, and actually it's coming out of their net on the purchase. So you have to think, if you're asking for 3% closing costs on a $300,000 home, well, that's $9,000 less dollars that the seller then makes on the purchase of that home. So again, it is very negotiable, not a guarantee by any means at all, but something that's good to know, and maybe can help alleviate a little bit of stress if you, prior to this video, were like, I'm gonna buy a house tomorrow, and you're like, just kidding, I don't know if I can. You're not necessarily on the hook every time for these closing costs, but you're also not on the hook for it, if that makes sense. You can also always shop around for different title companies, different lenders, because again, a lot of these prices vary dependent on those companies, and some are more expensive than others. So if you feel like you're not getting a fair deal, obviously you can consult with your realtor, but also you have every right in the world to shop around for title companies and different lenders, and work with whoever you think fits you best. Also, something that I quickly mentioned early on in this video is that there are programs, especially here in Minnesota, that offer help to buyers with their closing costs. Some type of down payment assistance, some closing cost assistance, things like that. There are a lot of options out there, and I strongly implore people to look into that themselves, or ask their lender or ask their real estate agent to help them, explore further on those things. Because again, as we found out, $300,000 home, all your closing costs, you're looking at roughly $9,000. That's not nothing, especially because as of, fall 2025, the median home price here in Minneapolis, at least, is $400,000. So when you start talking those numbers, 3% of $400,000, that's 12 grand. So again, you know, these numbers can add up very quickly. But again, understanding these costs and thus planning accordingly can help ensure, you know, a smoother closing process, can help ensure way less stress from you, way less surprises, and seriously just a better overall experience buying your first home. And that's all I got on this video. If you're still here, if you made it to the end, I appreciate you, seriously, and I will catch you on the next one.